Week 3 of the Vira Quiltalong. I hope you're doing well. One thing I wanted to talk about is this week, as we start to make our individual blocks, some tips that have worked for me in making this sort of scrappy quilt. So I have to say that this phase of making these scrappy quilts is kind of when I start getting into a real groove. I love this phase because if you followed along with the first 2 weeks and what we've done, and I'll leave a link to those, we have sort of set ourselves up for having a lot of play for these last couple of weeks of the construction of the Vira quilt, and which is my favorite. Let's talk about some tips. You've cut your pieces, ideally you've cut out all of the pieces that you need for your pattern, for the size quilt that you're making. You are ready to start sewing. You've got a new needle in your sewing machine. You've got some neutral thread, and you've got your snips ready. You've got some bobbins wound, and you're ready to start. The first thing you're going to do is make all of your half square triangle units. You will look on the pattern to make the number that you need, and you're using the larger squares that you cut of your light value and your dark value to make these. I make them the way most of us make them, where you put 2 squares together, right sides together, you draw a line, you stitch a 1/4 inch away from that line on either side, cut them apart into 2 units, you press the seam allowances towards the darker of the 2. So there's no real magic there, just a lot of chain piecing and repetitive piecing. Fun fact, I taught a sewing class many years ago in person. One of my students, who was new to sewing half square triangles, felt very good when she sewed her first pair of half square triangle units together. I explained to her that once you sew them together, press them, that you need to square them up to the size that you need. So you need to shave off a little bit on all 4 sides. She looked at me in disbelief and said, "I will not be doing that." My response to that in any case is, you know what? You don't have to. I think quilting can take any perspective that works for you. I, however, always trim up my half square triangle units to the desired size. And I use my ruby ruler for this. So I am using the diagonal line here to lay it over the seam allowance. I am trimming 2 sides, and I have to say, I used to carry these in my shop and I sold out, but these Omnigrid rotating mat, I love this mat because it really stays in place and it's very portable, and I use it not only for trimming up my blocks, but I also use it to lay out an individual block and take it to my sewing machine, which is right over there. So I love this. And a little tip from me, because I live in the desert where things are very dry and sometimes it doesn't want to rotate as well, I take a little bit of non-stick cooking spray. I spray it on a paper towel, and I just slide the paper towel in between the 2 layers and just make sure it covers the inside a little bit. Not a lot, just a little bit. And it always works just great. I also wanted to bring to your attention that what's really kind of interesting to me is how these blocks can change as you go through the picking of the fabric, the cutting of the original squares, the sewing of the half square triangles, and finally the construction of the blocks. So look at this one here. This side, the light value side in this particular unit, is kind of a traditional feeling pattern. In certain cases, I would not necessarily combine it with this print that I combined it with. But when I was gathering these to make half square triangle units, I was not looking at what I was pairing with each other. I was mainly looking at not repeating the same block because you still want that scrappy look. So I wanted all of the blocks to be very different. But when you turn this into a sewn unit like this half square triangle block, I think it works just fine. This one's probably even a better example. So this fabric here is one of the dark valued fabrics that I have. And I remember I pulled that one to sort of relate back to this dark value one. And I also wanted it to relate back to like this dark value one. But as a standalone fabric, it wasn't my favorite. On the other side of it is a very traditional looking pattern for the light value. Here's another square of it that might show the pattern a little bit better. I don't have a problem with the way those came together in this half square triangle unit. I think it looks pretty good. Just wanted to point that out. It's kind of interesting to me how fabrics change as you're creating these scrappy quilts. You may find that as well. I'd love to hear if you do. Now that I've created all of my half square triangle units, I have not yet created all of the star point blocks that I have to do next. And in the pattern, it talks about doing that part next. What I have found now that I'm making this one for the second time is I actually like to take, like I've got my little stacks of star center and star points separated according to color. I think it's actually better to make this quilt block by block, and I'll show you what I mean. So I have a center here, which is one of my star centers, and I've got matching star points. So then what I'm going to do, I know that I need a half square triangle unit with a dark and light here and here. So I'm just going to make sure I pick two different ones. And because this one is so dark and so orange, maybe I want to pick something totally different for this. So that's definitely not as dark as that dark value. I like how that looks. So then I'm going to need 3 dark valued squares here, and I want them all, again, all to be different. So then I've got these 3 here. And now I need 3 light value ones. So I'm going to pull from my light value ones. Like for instance, this one here, I like the way this picks up a little bit of the pink in these darker blocks. Now I've got the basic pieces. And now I need 2 of these blue star point little squares for each of these 4 blocks according to the pattern. And so I'm going to put 2 on each one to make sure they all are the same blue as the center. I do draw a line. I have a fine line pencil that I use. I do draw a line. Sometimes people feel that this is too small of a block. You don't need to draw the line. And sometimes I don't. But for this I did, because I can do a lot of things in life. I can drive stick shift. I don't know. I can do a lot of random things. For some reason, I can never make one of these blocks to be totally even at the top. So I don't know why. So I draw my lines, and the first thing I'm going to do is take these 4 blocks and one of the blue pieces over to my sewing machine. I think in the pattern it shows doing the left side first. For these, I've been doing the right side first on these blocks. Doesn't matter which one, as long as you do all 4 same side. So if I'm doing the right side, I'm going to line it up. And my tips for sewing these, I chain piece these 4 pieces. So what I do is I line this up. My presser foot is here, and I start here, sew directly on the line, do the next one, and I want to get them, as close to lined up as possible. And then I'm going to sew that one. I don't break my thread. Sew that one, and then sew the last one. So here they are sewn together. I'll trim them apart. And then I'm just going to trim off the excess here. Essentially, we're making a flying geese unit. And then you're going to press these with the seam allowance going towards the blue, the piece we just added. So now we need to add the second point. So I'll do the same thing. We're gonna add these like so. And I find it easier to start from the center, just like we did the first time. So starting from the center and coming off of the end. So I'll go do that now. And press these just like you did for the others, the first side you put on, and you've got the 4 star point units that you need to complete the block. I think this is how I had it. I'm not sure. Yeah, I think this is how I had it. So then I put it on this rotating mat and just carry it over to my sewing machine. I wanted to give some thoughts about constructing this because I think it's really important on these scrappy quilts to not overwhelm yourself by thinking about how one block that you've just constructed looks with the block that you're about to construct. I really want you to only focus on one block at a time, because here's the logic. All of these fabrics that you've cut, they're all going to get paired with each other in some form or fashion. So trying to plan that out is kind of a fool's errand because they're all going to end up beside of each other or near each other in some form. Focus on one block at a time. And for each block, you just want to make sure that you have a lot of different fabrics. We just are going to worry about making each one of these very unique and scrappy. When I take this block to the sewing machine, as I will 80 times, because there are 80 blocks in the one that I'm making, I will start by putting this block on top of that one. So I did the middle one over the one on the left. And what I mean about me never being able to line or to get this even, what I do instead is I put this pieced unit. I realize both these units are pieced, but I put this one with star points on top because my important areas when I'm sewing are going to be this point where the stars are. See how those are not quite even? Yep. And because those are not completely even, a lot of times this part is not completely even between the two fabrics. So what I do is I line up this back edge. So I want the two fabrics even here because I've trimmed this unit up to be the correct size. I sew and I make sure that my needle goes just a thread or two to the seam allowance side of where those two stitch lines intersect. Or if it goes directly on it, I mean, that's fine too. But I do that, have those sewn together. And then this next one, I sew these two together, put these right sides together. But what I do is I flip it over so that, again, I've got the pieced unit facing up and I can see what I'm doing. The other thing I use is a stiletto of some sort. Now, I have a porcupine quill that I love to use, and my cat has picked it up and walked out of the room with it in its mouth before, but I try to put it away when I'm not using it. But what I do is I don't pin these units. It takes too much time. I just line them up and make sure that when I am stitching, I have my pieced unit on top with the important seam right here. So that's what I do. And the other tip that I'll give you that I have found very beneficial, these are small blocks. I lower my stitch length just a little bit. I think it helps because we're doing some fiddly work here for this last one. Again, same thing, pieced unit on top. I go through the sewing machine under the presser foot with that piece on top. So then when I have those three, I've chain pieced them. I trim off this one and I open it up. Actually, I open it up that way. And then I continue on adding this last piece. And I lay them back on this little rotating mat and I bring it back so that once these are all done, I can press them out before I sew them together. On the pattern, there is pressing suggestions for the seam allowances. They're just suggestions. A lot of times the blocks themselves can be rotated around, and so you may need to repress some seams in a different direction so that they nest with the other seams. So don't sweat it. So then you'll sew the 3 rows together to complete it. I've got this all wrong, sorry. There we go. And then you have these lovely blocks. Those are my tips. I hope you have fun with this part because this is really when you are starting to put together this quilt that is truly your own, with your own fabrics from your stash. You've made value decisions. It's all from your point of view. So it's uniquely you. I can't wait to see what you do. If you're new to the Vira Quiltalong and you would like to join us, the information is at the link below. It is not too late. Thank you for joining me. Have a great time, and I will see you in next week's video.